William Moore confessed to the kidnap of Gerard McCleverty, but there were still no forensic links to the Shankill Butchers' other victims, unless somebody talked.
We had then a man admitting kidnapping Gerard McCleverty. So to tie him in to the other cutthroat killings, that was another matter.
2 days later, it's 10 a.m. in the morning, and Moore was questioned about the cutthroat murders. He said, "I had nothing to do with them." Now, at lunchtime, he was being led back to his cell when he stopped and he said, "Wait, I want to see you. I can help you. I know about the throat cuttings," he said. And then he went on, "I don't know what to do. I'm scared." Moore was sent back to his cell for the afternoon to think over what he had said.
We looked in on him from time to time, and it was obvious that he was under pressure. He was beginning to wilt.
So now it's a waiting game.
Not so much wondering about it as expecting it.
May 21st, 7:35 p.m. and Moore is brought back into the interrogation room again. Now at this point, he admits his involvement in all the throat cuttings. Here's what he says: "Murphy done the first 3 and I done the rest." When he was asked why, he said it was on Murphy's instructions while Murphy was in jail. It was that bastard Murphy who led me into all this.
We had Murphy produced from jail to Castlereagh on a number of occasions and interviewed him.
What was he like in the interview room?
Totally dismissive, laughed at the whole thing. Later, we asked Moore and Bates to consider giving evidence against Murphy. And in fact, they agreed to do so in the Bates statements, naming Murphy. But then they later retracted those statements because of fear.
Moore, Bates and McAllister were quick to excuse their part in the murders. They said, "We decided to go and get chips. We couldn't find a chippy open. Somebody suggested we go and get a take. But Murphy's 3 henchmen, along with 8 others, did confess their involvement in the murders. Over the next 2 years, they also confessed to their involvement in the killings of 11 other people, Catholics and Protestants. They shot 5 men in a bar. They murdered 2 Protestant lorrymen they thought were Catholics. They killed 3 men during Loyalist feuding. And they murdered a 10-year-old boy when they bombed an Easter parade. With 19 murders between them, they were at the time the most prolific serial killers in British history. After you, sir. In February 1979, the Crumlin Road courthouse in Belfast was packed to the rafters with the world's press to hear the sentences on the Shankill Butchers. Bring me back. What was happening around here?
Well, you had the relatives of all the accused, the 11 accused. You had probably victims' relatives. You had police. You had barristers. And really, really tight security here. And I remember there were 11 of them, and they all couldn't fit into the dock, obviously, so some of them had to sit outside here, and on the far side. This is where they were, Stephen. You know, here they come up here, right? Well, all these guys were handcuffed when they were brought up on the dock, one by one, handcuffs taken off, taking their seats. The place was crackling with tension. These were people who decided enough was enough. We're going to own up to this.
Out comes Lord Justice O'Donnell then for sentencing. What happens?
They all got to their feet, and there's a clerk who read out all the charges. It must have gone on for over half an hour. How do you plead guilty? How do you plead guilty?
The judge said the murders would stand as a monument to blind, sectarian bigotry. He sentenced the gang to a total of nearly 2,000 years in prison. But in the naming of names, one was missing. Lenny Murphy.
That was the one name on everybody's lips. That was the one name, the Master Butcher, that we couldn't name. I mean, the judge knew who we were talking about. The barrister certainly knew who we were talking about. The boys in the dock knew who we were talking about.
The Shankill Butchers was a really bad time for the Shankill. These things were being done in the Protestant name. I can tell you, Protestant people didn't want it, but they didn't have the courage to stand up and say, this is not being done in our name.
It was probably unfair to the people of the Shankill to call them the Shankill Butchers. You know, it sort of put a slur on the whole road, didn't it, in a way? We don't blame all the people on the Shankill for what a few people did. And I have to tell you as well, before Stephen was buried, when all the comings and goings were at the house, there was two ladies came and I opened the door to them, and they introduced them as two ladies from the Shankill Road, and they didn't want to come in. They just said who they were, where they were from, and they were very sorry. And that was one of the most touching things that happened at that time. It meant an awful lot to us. It really did. I felt there was a wee bit of hope.
Three years after the trial, Murphy was released from jail. But his own sentence, a death sentence, was only 3 months away. In that time, he had become suspected of more murders. But in November 1982, murder caught up with Lenny Murphy. He was shot in Glencairn, the same estate where many of the butcher's victims were dumped.
It was people from within Murphy's own constituency. People who were very well known in the loyalist paramilitary underworld. They were the people who pointed the finger at Lenny Murphy. They were the people who gave the IRA government directions to his door. They told him where he would be at a certain time of the day, and that's how the IRA shot him.
But even in death, the master butcher found enough support in his own community to put a protective ring around him.
We're not getting any photos.
On his headstone, he was honoured as a military hero. To this day, there are still some who would glorify the Shankill Butchers. In 1997, with the Good Friday Agreement less than a year away, more than 1,000 lined the streets for Robert Bates' funeral. On her way home from work, Charlotte Morrissey was caught up in the procession.
I had to stay in my car for 2.5 hours, and there were huge wreaths. For me, it was like they were honouring some sort of a hero. You know, and is that what people really thought about the Shankill Butchers? Were they heroes? I found myself trapped in the car, unable to get out or speak. I can't tell you how I felt, but for me, the message was, you know, he was a hero. The man who cut my father to pieces and tortured him for 3 hours was a hero.
When William Moore died in 2009, a death notice paid tribute to him with the same epitaph inscribed on Lenny Murphy's headstone.
My father was a soldier. My father fought in 2 world wars. They were real heroes. Lenny Murphy wasn't a hero. He was a murdering thug who got away with the most atrocious murders. But that's not to say there isn't people on the Shankill who possibly look at him in a different light.
You know, as we look back now, and you take a slight comfort from the fact that the Shankill Butchers and the killings were so long ago, but how much of the sectarianism that allowed that to happen is still embedded?
Oh, sectarianism is still very much part of the community, both communities. It's the cancer that we haven't dealt with.
So when I ask you if you think that if something like the Shankill Butchers could ever happen again, unless we actually really tackle sectarianism, the answer's got to be yes.
Yes.
"19 people died at the hands of the Shankill Butchers, and though their sadistic aim was to kill Catholics, 9 who got in their way were Protestants. Some people say they were worse than the other notorious serial killer who was on the loose at the time. The Yorkshire Ripper said he heard voices urging him to kill. The Shankill Butchers just heard the sound of their own hatred. They used the Troubles for what they did. And what they did was no more than serial killing.
In a normal society, these people would be shunned by the members of their community. On this occasion, Lenny Murphy was let loose on society, and society paid a terrible price for it.
The family was never the same again. You can see from today, all this time later, the upset that it's still, and will still continue to cause.
It's hard to believe that there would be such cruelty on such a very, very deep level. Hatred. Hatred because, what? I'm a Catholic? Because my father was a different religion? A good man, a hard-working man who brought up his children to be good human beings, and to take him and torture him and beat him and cut him and remove parts of his body. It's beyond my comprehension. It really is.
And tomorrow morning on The Nolan Show, Stephen will be speaking to the victims' families. That's on BBC Radio Ulster from 9 o'clock. If you would like to hear a recorded list of organisations which can provide help and support, call the BBC Action Line on 08000 566 787. Calls are free from a landline. Mobile operators will charge. Lines are open 24 hours a day.